So just in case you missed it, Happy Easter. Happy Easter, right? So I guess the question, I always like to start with a question. So I'll start with an easy one for you today. When you think of Easter, what comes to mind? Like what do you think about with Easter? Right? I've had a lot of conversations with people about spring this morning, right? So spring, kind of new life, that makes sense. I know when I was a kid, I'd always look forward to the Easter basket and chocolate. I still look forward to chocolate, but other things as well, right? And I know a lot of folks do dinner with family and friends, and we all have kind of different traditional foods. Although I heard someone today say lamb is what they eat for Easter. Just think about that for a second. That lamb isn't risen, I don't think. No. But thank you. I get one pity laugh out of that one. Okay. So, but of course, Easter, right? That if you're part of the Christian faith, if you put your faith in Jesus, if you're kind of following that path, what we think of as Easter is that the tomb is empty, right? That's the imagery that we use, right? That Jesus had done this miraculous thing, that he had actually predicted that he would one day be executed, and on the third day he would rise, and then he pulled it off. If someone predicts their own death and resurrection and pulls it off, I'm going to go ahead and go with what they say, sort of thing, right? That is the foundation of our faith, but recognizing that it's the foundation of our faith, but also understanding that for many of us, that's a difficult thing to believe and to trust, right? And I think the thing that we always want to remember that, for those of us who have been in the faith for a long time and that we are so confident in that, as I am confident in that, recognizing that we're all on a journey, right? We're all on a path of growing in our faith, growing in our understanding, pursuing and trying to understand it. And part of our role as believers is to walk with people in that journey, to point in a direction where it makes sense, where God in his own time, through his Spirit, reveals to us deeper understandings, right? And this is true for all aspects of our faith, right? That none of us are finished. None of us are done, right? We're all in different places in our journey, right? And so we want to be there with one another, supporting each other as we go through that journey. And I think about the idea of Easter, that if you're someone who put your faith in Jesus, I think oftentimes when we think about Easter, we think about what we get. And I don't mean Easter baskets, right? But what do we get? We get salvation, right? We get eternity with God, this eternal life that begins in this life, a richer life, a more full life that carries on into eternity with God, that leads to freedom, right? Freedom from our mistakes, freedom from our failings, right? To use the Bible word, freedom from our sins, to actually live in that freedom. And of course, all the things we get because of Easter, because of Jesus, are of course important. But Jesus teaches us, and throughout the New Testament, it teaches us that what we get is just the beginning. It's just the starting point, right? That through our faith in Jesus, what we start on is a lifelong journey of growth, right? Growing in our faith, growing in our understanding, and recognizing that we are called to get to work, to actually be representations of Jesus in this life. Again, caring for people who are struggling, being there with one another when we're hurting, lifting people up when they're in a difficult time in their lives, and pointing people towards the love of Jesus. And so what I wanted to do this morning is, we often do as we're on the kind of big holidays like Christmas and Easter, that we actually go through the events of Easter. But one of the things that I think is really important for us to understand is that for the people who were there in the first century, 2,000 years ago, they experienced those events very, very differently than we do. Because if we think about what it's like for us, 2,000 years later, we look at what we call Holy Week, that window of time from Palm Sunday through Easter, and we just kind of click through the days, right? So Palm Sunday, we talked about that last week with Jesus rides into the town or into the city. Then we kind of jump out till Thursday, sometimes we call that Maundy Thursday. It's the night of the Last Supper, right, when Jesus sits down to that meal with his closest followers. It's what we celebrate with communion. Then we get to Friday, and Jesus is executed. And then we take the darkness of that moment, and what do? We jump right to Sunday, Resurrection Sunday. It's Easter, right? It's all good, right? We have the luxury of kind of clicking through those events kind of relatively quickly, right? But for those who were there with Jesus in the first century, they could not just jump to Easter, right? That for those who were closest to Jesus, they felt like they had lost everything that Friday, right? That they had committed their lives to Jesus, and as they were following Jesus, and they believed that he was the Messiah, right? God's final king, that he would reign forever. And even though he kept telling them that a day would come when I would be executed, but I will return, they thought it was like a metaphor. You know, if you read the Gospels closely, Jesus' followers are often very confused about what he's talking about. They don't really follow him. Yeah, I mean, well, they follow him, but they don't follow him, you know, sort of thing. Right? So what happens for them? Right? Jesus, who they thought would reign forever, died. And now they think they're wrong. Yeah, they loved Jesus, and he was their rabbi. He was their teacher. But how can he reign forever if he's dead? And for them, what now happens is a very difficult 48 hours. Right? Because as the sun goes down, and remember that this is, for Jewish culture at that time, right, they observed what we call the Sabbath, right? So from sundown Friday to sundown Saturday, you couldn't really do anything. Right? So what ends up happening is that Jesus dies on the cross. He gets very quickly buried in a tomb, and a tomb is basically, in this case, a cave with a rock sealing it up. And then it's the Sabbath. Everyone just goes home. You can't go out to the stores. You can't really go out and do anything. And so people are kind of left to just kind of sit there from Friday night until Saturday night going, we were all completely wrong. What should we do? And then on top of that, Jesus, whom they loved very much, had not been buried according to their customs. His body had not been prepared and consistent with their customs. And so that's what's happening as we step into the narrative, as we get to Saturday night. This is what's going on emotionally for everyone who was a follower of Jesus. So the gospel writer Mark tells us this. Saturday evening, when the Sabbath ended, Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of James, and Salome went out and purchased burial spices so they could anoint Jesus' body. Right, so they've gotten to Saturday night, and so these three women go out to the stores, buy the spices that they need to actually bury Jesus properly for their culture. So they go and do that, but now it's nighttime. And so they can't even go deal with it. So they have to go back home and wait until the next morning. So as Mark continues, he says, very early on Sunday morning, just at sunrise, the three women went to the tomb. On the way, they were asking each other, who will roll away the stone for us from the entrance to the tomb? In other words, we've got this great plan, but how are we going to do it? We don't even know how we're going to be able to get to his body. But as they arrived, they looked up and saw that the stone, which was very large, had already been rolled aside. And and for us, in the time that we live in, that image of the tomb, of the cave with the stone rolled away, for us, that's an image of joy and for hope. Right? That's what we use to represent the joy of his resurrection. That's not what they thought. They think he's still dead. So what they feel and what they experience is they see that tomb and it's open. They think the worst moment of their life has just gotten worse. That not only is Jesus dead, but someone has broken into his tomb and either stolen the body or desecrated the body or done something awful. And so for them, they are now hitting their lowest low, the lowest they've ever been. So they go into the tomb, and as Mark continues, he tells us this. When they entered the tomb, the women saw a young man clothed in a white robe sitting on the right side, and the women were shocked. And the narrative goes on to tell us that this, what they think is a young man, is actually an angel. And the angel starts talking to them. And according to the gospel author Luke, this is what the angel tells them. The angel says, "Why are you looking among the dead for someone who is alive? He isn't here. He is risen from the dead." In other words, you're looking at a place where there are dead things. He's not dead, right? He's not going to be here. And then the angel continues. He says, remember what he told you back in Galilee, that the Son of Man must be betrayed into the hands of sinful men and be crucified, and that he would rise again on the third day. And then they remembered that Jesus had said this. See, Jesus had been pointing to this all along, and he'd been telling that this would happen. And again, I don't know if they thought it was a metaphor. If he was talking much more kind of in eternal time frames and the final rising, but they just didn't think this is what was going to actually happen. But now as they're experiencing it, and they have this interaction with the angel, they hear this and they're like, oh yeah, I remember that now. This is what he said would happen. And so what happens for them is I think what happens for us often in our faith, where we have these moments, where we have these encounters with God or these experiences with God, or something that we've heard a million times suddenly clicks and we connect. And we remember all these experiences that we've had have been pointing to this moment. And that's what happens for these three women. And then the angel continues. Now go and tell his disciples, including Peter, that Jesus is going ahead of you to Galilee. You will see Jesus there, just as he told you before he died. And what I want to kind of look at a couple things here with what the angel says. First of all, these three women, as far as we can tell, are the first to recognize that Jesus has been resurrected. They're the first ones to see it. They're the first ones to understand. And so what does the angel say to them? Oh, now you understand? Go hole up somewhere and don't tell anybody? No, they are given the same instructions that we are given. Now that you understand it, go tell people. Go share that message. Now that you understand, don't keep it to yourself. Go share it with others. So that's the first thing he says. Now notice also that the angel says, go tell his disciples, including Peter. Now, of course, including Peter. Peter's kind of like the lead apostle, right? Like, of course you're going to tell Peter. So why does the angel call out Peter? Well, it's important to understand and important to remember that Peter was in a pretty dark place at this point. Remember that Jesus was one of Peter's closest friends. Right? And they were really close to one another, and they'd spent a lot of time together, right? That Jesus wasn't just Peter's rabbi, right? Not just his teacher, he was his friend. And they had encounters where Jesus would talk about that he would die, and Peter would say, and I will follow you into anything, and I will follow you, I will risk my life for you. And Jesus had told Peter, I know you think that's the case, but when it comes down to it, you'll deny you even know me. And after Jesus was arrested, we know that Peter kind of followed along at a distance as people recognized him and said, hey, aren't you with that Jesus guy? And what does Peter do? I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even know who that guy is. And he does that on 3 separate occasions. That when he's asked, hey, aren't you with Jesus? He says, I don't even know who he is. I don't know what you're talking about. And then we know that as Jesus is down dead at this point, as he's on the cross, Peter now recognizes that I told him how much I cared about him. I told him how much I loved him, yet I denied that I even knew him. And I think what's really packaged in this is when the angel says, hey, go tell the disciples, including Peter, make sure Peter knows that he is not just welcome to be back with Jesus. Jesus is looking forward to being back with him. Right? And the huge message here for all of us is that we don't want to let our failings, again, use the Bible word, don't let our sins or the people we harm or the things that go on in our lives, don't let that keep us from reaching out to God. In fact, what we see here is that when we are most broken and we are most torn down, God calls us out by name. He reaches for us when we're hurting. We think that when we're hurting and when we're torn down, that we've gotten so much wrong that God doesn't want anything to do with us. And the message here is that, no, God wants that relationship. He wants that connection. That our failings do not keep us away from God. That God is calling us to him even in our darkest moments. So now as the angel points out that Jesus said he would be in Galilee, that he would be there. And after some time, the apostles have an encounter with him, right? The gospel author John tells us this. John says that Sunday evening, in other words, Easter night, that evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. And why are they so afraid? Well, they just killed the guy who was leading their movement. So if they're willing to kill the guy who's at the front of the movement, maybe they're willing to kill a few more, right? Because remember, we talked about this last week, that, in Roman world, the ancient Roman world, order and peace were most important of all. And you've got to kill a few innocent people to keep the peace, cost of doing business. Right? And this Jesus crew had been stirring things up a lot, and the religious leaders were getting very stirred up about it, and others were getting stirred up about it. And so if they were willing to kill Jesus, they might be willing to kill his followers as well. So they're hiding in here, very fearful about what this means for them. But as they're hiding, John tells us that suddenly Jesus was standing there among them. "Peace be with you," Jesus said. And as Jesus spoke, he showed them the wounds in his hands and in his side. And his disciples were filled with joy when they saw the Lord. In other words, Jesus is saying that this is not a vision. This is not imaginary. That the actual person, the physical being that had actually died on that cross is actually here with you now. That what I promised you would happen has actually happened. And you notice it says that the disciples are filled with joy. And of course they're filled with joy. Their rabbi, their friend that they thought was dead is here with them. He has been resurrected as he promised. And one of the things that I think about when I read that text is that not only are they filled with joy, but I think Jesus is joyful in this moment. Right? As Jesus is on the cross, and just before he dies, he uses this Greek word, tetelestai. I can't say it. I'm going to try it. Tetelestai. I'm going to go to the English. It is finished. Right? That all the work that he'd been doing, the reason he'd come, to show people what God was like, to demonstrate what a life connected to God is like, and to restore humanity's connection with God, to provide a path to God based on faith. That work was finished. And now as Jesus is here with Peter and the other disciples, they're starting to recognize that who he is and what it means. And so he's joyful that they are starting to see what it's all about. And he's joyful that they're going to soon begin a path of making a real difference. His followers are finally beginning to understand. And as John continues, he says, again, Jesus said, "Peace be with you." And this is so important. "As the Father has sent me, so I am sending you." Just like what the angel said to the three women. Now that you understand, go and tell other people about it. Go and demonstrate it to other people. Jesus is now saying to the disciples, now that you understand what it's about, go and share it with other people. Go tell others about it. Go live out the life as I've shown you and told you to and called you to. Now that you understand, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with other people. Demonstrate it with your life. Head out and do that. That's what he wanted them to understand. Now that you understand, take peace in what it means for you and share it with other people. Right? And that's what we are all called to do with our lives, right? To embrace this gift that we have received, but not just hold on to it. It's a gift that's best experienced when we share it with other people and step out and do something with it. But it turns out that, much like us, we hear that message. I mean, you guys hear me say this so much, you must be sick of it. Right? Don't just hold on to it. Go tell people about it. Go live your lives that way. Go point to it. Well, Jesus himself was telling them this. And you know what they did? Same thing we often do. That's cool. It's really good for me. But it doesn't appear that they really did much with it. That even though Jesus said, as the Father has sent me, so I am sending you, as far as we can tell, they didn't start doing that. In fact, it seems that some time goes by, and the disciples have not seen Jesus again for whatever period of time. We don't really know exactly how long. And as this is happening, his disciples aren't really doing anything. And they apparently start to become maybe a bit uncomfortable. They don't know what to do with themselves. So what they start doing is what they used to do. They used to be fishermen for a living. I'm like, well, I guess we're not doing anything here, so we'll go back to fishing. And there's a real message in that for us, right? That when we kind of make progress in our lives, and we start to kind of move in a positive direction, and then we start to become uncomfortable for whatever reason, maybe because of the progress we're making, maybe just because life is making us uncomfortable. We look to our past, and there's things we left behind that we didn't really want to have a part of our lives anymore. But that looks really comfortable. And I think I'm just going to head back to where it's comfortable. And that's what the disciples did. That's what Peter and some of the other disciples did. They went back to doing what was comfortable for them. They went fishing. Now, as they're out fishing, they look to the shoreline and they realize that Jesus is now on the shoreline. So they quickly rush over to the shoreline to get to Jesus. And when they get there, does Jesus kind of lay into them and reprimand them and yell at them? No. What does he do? Cook some breakfast. They arrive on the beach and he's literally there cooking them breakfast, welcoming them. I'm so glad to see you. I'm so glad you're here. And he invites them to eat breakfast with them. The man they had seen die not long earlier is now cooking them breakfast, and they sit down to breakfast together. And as the narrative continues, it says that after breakfast, Jesus asks Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" You know, and for a long time, I would read that and I'm going, more than these? Like, what is these? And it's interesting. There's actually a great deal of theological study on what Jesus means when he says more than these. And basically, the majority of theologians kind of boil it down to three possibilities. When Jesus says to Peter, "Hey, Peter, do you love me more than these?" In other words, "Hey, Peter, do you love me more than your other friends here love me?" That's one possibility. Another possibility is, "Hey, Peter, do you love me more than you love these other friends of yours?" But there's a third possibility, and this is the one that I think it is. When Jesus says to Peter, "Hey, Peter, do you love me more than these?" I picture Jesus gesturing back towards the things that were so familiar to you. That fishing boat, that net, the sea here, that place where you've spent much of your life that had become very comfortable for you. Do you love me more than those things where you've historically found comfort? Do you love me enough to move beyond those things? Now, whatever Jesus means by that, we don't know specifically. We can only kind of try to infer it. But as he says to Peter, "Hey, do you love me more than these?" Peter replies, "Yes, Lord, you know I love you." And then Jesus says, "Well, then feed my lambs." And then Jesus then asks Peter that same question twice more. He said, basically, "Hey, Peter, do you love me more than these?" And Peter's like, "Yeah, Lord, you know I love you." And Jesus says, "Well, take care of my lambs." And then Jesus asks him a third time, "Hey, Peter, do you love me more than these?" And Peter says, "Yeah, Lord, you know I do." And then Jesus says, "Well, then feed my sheep." Now, why does Jesus ask Peter this question 3 times? Some people have suggested that the reason Jesus asked Peter this question 3 times is because Peter had denied Jesus 3 times. So, Peter got it wrong 1, 2, 3 times. So if you tell me you love me 1, 2, 3 times, that'll make up for it. I'm not buying that one. Some people think it might be. I don't think it is. That's very works-based. That doesn't make much sense to me. I think that Jesus is making a couple of points here. First of all, Jesus is being abundantly clear. Our failings, our mistakes do not disqualify us. That he is seeking a relationship with us. He is calling us to action. He's calling us to do something, right? Our relationship with Jesus does not require us to be perfect, right? We're all on a journey. We're all growing. We're all getting it wrong, and we're all trying to do better. So our relationship with Jesus does not require us to be perfect. But I think there's even a bigger point going on there. When Jesus says, "If you love me more than these things," what is he saying? Please do what I asked you to do. Right? When he talks about feed my lambs, care for my lambs, feed my sheep. In other words, I asked you to care for these people. I asked you to do the work I called you to. If you love me like you say you do what I asked you. Because real love, true love is identifiable by action. I mean, imagine if I tell Bonnie, you guys see me telling Bonnie I love her all the time. Well, hopefully you don't have to imagine that. I do tell her I love her. But if you see me telling Bonnie I love her all the time, but I'm rude to her, I disregard her, I don't listen to her when she asks me something, you find out that I disappear from home for nights at a time, never tell her where I'm at, show up in the morning, don't tell her anything but, hey, love you, babe. And then, there's all this work to be done around the house, and she's asking me for help. I'm like, love you, and I sit and watch TV. Love you. You're going to go. He doesn't love her. Those are just words. Because if he loved her, we'd be able to see it. We'd recognize it. There would be action that makes sense in that relationship. And so as Jesus says this to Peter, if you love me, do what I've asked you. Because the key thing for us to understand is that our relationship with God, our relationship with Jesus, is not about religion. It's not about religious activity. Our relationship with God is a relationship anchored in love. Right? God and Jesus' love for us. Right? He loved us so much that God sent Jesus to reconcile us to him. And as we embrace that love and we start to recognize that love and start to grow in that love, we start to love God more. And it takes time to do that. But as we do that, as we love God, there should be evidence of that love. And Jesus tells us that the evidence of your love for Jesus, your evidence of your love for God, is loving action towards other people, other human beings. The way we demonstrate our love for God is by loving one another, by reaching out to people around us, even people we don't necessarily know, to provide support, to provide help, to lift people up when they are down, and to point towards Jesus with our lives. See, I think the reason that Jesus says to Peter 3 times, if you love me, do what I'm asking you to do, is I think that Jesus knew that we would prefer religious activity over living out the love of God in the world. That we would find comfort in symbols and pictures and glass. Nothing is wrong with any of those things. If they give you comfort and they help you connect with God, that's fantastic. But none of those things are the point. The point is living out the love of God. The point is stepping into people's lives. The point is showing up and in our lives pointing towards a different kind of world where people don't have to struggle and suffer. That when people have less, those who have more step in. When those who can't take care of themselves, those who can help step in. And then we talk about what God does in our life and how it transforms us and where it points us in our lives. The gift and message of Easter is that God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son. And the invitation to us is to live out all that means, to actually reach into lives, to make a difference in lives. Right? The thing that we celebrate, through Easter is that God, through Jesus, has invited us to be part of his family. We use the image of, it's a banquet table, and we are invited to the table. Right? This morning, as we celebrate communion, we celebrate the representation of that. Right? And just as Jesus has invited you and me to that table, he is calling us to invite others to that table as well. So as we go out this morning, embracing this gift of Easter, I would say embracing this beautiful day, but we like rain, right? Rain's good, right? Rain's good. It's not quite the spring day that you kind of hope for, but you know what? It's warmer than it was a month ago, right? But Jesus calls us to use our lives to make a difference. That the gift that we receive because of Easter is a gift that is best received when we share it. If we just hold on to it for ourselves, what's that worth? I mean, yeah, you're good, you're saved. I'm not going to make the analogy I was going to. You're saved, you're good, right? But the point is that we are called to do something with it. It's like you've been invited on a journey and somebody hands you a stack of tickets and everyone needs to get out. And you're like, I got my seat. Boom, I'm sitting down, right? And we don't invite anybody else on the journey with us, right? That's what we're called to. right? We're called to bring others in this journey with us. And so let's embrace the gift of all that is and what it really means in Easter.